Some monuments are remembered because kings built them. Others survived because empires wrote them into history. But this monument is different. It stands in silence, defying time, while the people who created it disappeared so completely that even their names have been lost. Who were they? How did they build something that still puzzles archaeologists today? And why was this incredible place almost forgotten by history itself? Tonight we're uncovering one of humanity's greatest forgotten achievements. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we explore the mysteries of our ancient past. The first thing anyone notices is not the size of the stones, although they are immense. It is the silence. Across an open landscape shaped by thousands of years of wind rain and changing seasons, massive blocks of rock still stand where human hands placed them long before the first history books were ever imagined. They have watched forests grow and disappear, rivers alter their courses, entire cultures rise and fall, and countless generations walk past without knowing the names of the people who built them. The monument survives. Its builders do not. That contrast lies at the heart of one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Some civilizations leave behind kings whose names are carved into stone cities, whose streets can still be traced, or written records describing their triumphs and failures. Here there is almost none of that. No surviving chronicles explain the purpose of these stones. No royal inscriptions celebrate their construction. No forgotten library waits beneath the soil to reveal the identities of the architects. Instead, the monument exists almost alone, surrounded by clues that are powerful but incomplete. Every excavation adds another fragment. Every scientific breakthrough sharpens the picture a little further. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for the people who devoted extraordinary effort to creating something that would outlive every memory of their existence. Long before famous kingdoms appeared across Europe, or the pyramids dominated the deserts of northeastern Africa, communities with no writing system were already transforming landscapes in ways that still surprise modern researchers. These were not wandering bands surviving from day to day without planning for the future. What survives in the archaeological record suggests organized societies capable of coordinating hundreds, perhaps even thousands of individuals towards shared goals that unfolded over generations rather than months. Such achievements challenge an old assumption that only powerful states ruled by kings could construct monumental architecture. The evidence increasingly points in another direction. Collective effort, shared beliefs, and careful organization may have been enough. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Standing among the weathered stones today, it is tempting to imagine a single dramatic moment when the monument suddenly appeared. Reality is far more fascinating. Construction unfolded across centuries. Different generations inherited plans they had not begun, and completed structures they would never fully explain to their descendants. Every stone represented countless hours of labor. Every earthwork reflected careful planning. Every alignment with the surrounding landscape hinted that the builders understood their environment with remarkable precision. The monument did not emerge from an empty wilderness. Around it stretched a living landscape filled with people, animals, forests, rivers, fields, and seasonal movement. Children grew into adults beneath these skies. Elders passed along traditions that had survived for centuries. Families gathered for ceremonies whose meanings are now almost impossible to reconstruct. Fires burned where archaeologists later discovered tiny fragments of charcoal. Footprints disappeared almost instantly in damp soil, but traces of those journeys remained buried beneath layers of sediment until modern excavations slowly uncovered them. Perhaps the greatest surprise is that these forgotten builders were not primitive in the sense once imagined by 19th century scholars. They possessed no metal cranes wheeled transport for every stage of construction or written engineering manuals. Yet they demonstrated astonishing practical knowledge. They understood stone well enough to select different kinds for different purposes. They knew how landscapes drained after heavy rain. They recognized where sunlight rose during particular times of the year. They organized labor on a scale requiring cooperation among distant communities. Such accomplishments force modern observers to reconsider what complexity truly means. Writing is often treated as the beginning of civilization, but human cooperation existed long before written language appeared. A society without surviving documents is not necessarily a society without sophisticated ideas. Its knowledge simply traveled through memory, ritual, storytelling, observation, and repeated practice instead of ink pressed onto clay or carved into stone. This difference explains why history sometimes appears strangely uneven. Empires that lasted only a few centuries can fill entire libraries because they produced written records. Meanwhile, communities that endured for much longer may leave behind only pottery fragments, pollen grains, animal bones, stone tools, and monumental architecture. Their achievements become quieter, requiring careful interpretation rather than direct testimony. Archaeology becomes less like reading a biography and more like assembling an enormous puzzle after most of its pieces have vanished. The landscape itself preserves part of the story. Ancient pollen trapped beneath layers of earth reveals forests that once covered regions now dominated by open grassland. Seeds recovered from buried soils show what people cultivated or gathered. Tiny chemical traces locked inside human teeth reveal where individuals spent their childhoods. Isotopic analysis even allows researchers to identify people who travelled remarkable distances before arriving at the monument. These scientific techniques have transformed understanding during the past few decades. They reveal movement across surprisingly large regions, suggesting that the builders were connected through extensive social networks rather than isolated villages. Yet every answer introduces another mystery. If communities possessed the ability to organize such ambitious projects, why did they leave behind so little direct evidence of themselves? Why did later generations fail to preserve even the names of those responsible? Scholars still debate whether this disappearance reflects gradual cultural transformation, migration changing religious traditions, or the simple passage of thousands of years erasing fragile memories that were never written down. The evidence remains incomplete, and perhaps it always will. Even the stones themselves continue to surprise researchers. Careful analysis shows that not all originated nearby. Some travelled astonishing distances across challenging terrain. Transporting blocks weighing several tons without modern machinery demanded careful planning, engineering skill, and enormous communal effort. The journey of each stone may have been as meaningful as its final placement. For the builder's movement across the landscape could have formed part of the ceremony itself rather than merely solving a practical problem. As centuries passed, new people encountered the monument without fully understanding its origins. Stories replaced memories. Legends filled gaps left by forgotten history. Supernatural explanations flourished because ordinary human effort seemed too incredible to explain such achievements. Medieval writers imagined giants. Later traditions credited powerful magicians. Others believed impossible civilizations had vanished overnight. Such tales reveal less about the monument's construction than about humanity's enduring discomfort with mysteries that resist easy answers. Modern archaeology paints a different picture. It replaces mythical builders with real communities whose names have disappeared, but whose fingerprints remain impressed in fired clay, whose meals are preserved in discarded animal bones, whose footsteps survive beneath buried pathways, and whose remarkable vision still shapes the horizon thousands of years later. Their monument has become their voice. Every standing stone speaks not through words, but through endurance. The greatest irony is that the monument achieved exactly what monumental architecture often seeks to accomplish. It defeated time, individual lives ended, villages disappeared, languages changed beyond recognition, entire belief systems faded into silence. Yet the structure remained quietly waiting for people born thousands of years later to ask the same question again and again. Who built this place? The more carefully the evidence is examined, the more remarkable the answer becomes, not because it belongs to mythical beings or forgotten empires, but because it belongs to ordinary people whose extraordinary achievement became greater than history itself. The monument begins long before the first stone ever rises above the horizon. Its story starts in a world that feels almost unfamiliar, a landscape suspended between the end of one age and the uncertain beginning of another. Thousands of years earlier, enormous sheets of ice dominate much of northern Europe. Winters stretch endlessly across frozen plains. Herds of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and reindeer move through territories that humans follow with remarkable resilience. The people living here are hunters, travelers, and careful observers of changing seasons. Their world is constantly in motion. Then slowly, by geological standards, but dramatically by human ones, everything changes. The climate warms, the glaciers retreat. Rivers born from melting ice carve fresh valleys across the land. Forests begin advancing northward year after year, replacing open tundra with dense woodland. Pine arrives first, followed by birch, hazel, elm oak, and other species that gradually transform entire ecosystems. Animals adapted to frozen landscapes disappear or retreat toward colder regions, while red deer, wild boar aurochs, and countless smaller creatures spread through expanding forests. This transformation is neither gentle nor predictable. Floods reshape river systems. Coastlines migrate as rising seas swallow vast tracts of land that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Entire hunting territories vanish beneath advancing waters. Archaeologists now know that enormous areas of what is today the North Sea were once dry land filled with rivers, lakes, marshes, forests, and human communities. That forgotten region, often called Doggerland, gradually disappears beneath the sea over thousands of years. What survives in the record suggests generations watched familiar landscapes shrink, perhaps never realizing that the changes would continue until the horizon itself moved. The disappearance of these lands alters far more than geography. It changes migration routes, food sources, and patterns of settlement. Communities that once travelled freely across broad plains become increasingly separated by expanding coastlines and waterways. Isolation encourages local traditions while new maritime connections begin linking distant shores. Boats become more valuable than ever before. Rivers turn into highways rather than barriers. As forests mature, human life changes with them. Dense woodland demands different skills than open tundra. Hunting requires patience instead of long pursuits across grasslands. Gathering edible plants becomes increasingly important. People learn the rhythms of hazelnuts, berries, mushrooms, fish migrations, and seasonal game. Knowledge of the environment grows astonishingly detailed, passed from one generation to the next, without writing preserved entirely through memory and experience. For thousands of years, these communities remain remarkably successful. Archaeological discoveries reveal sophisticated tools crafted from stone, antler, and bone. Fishing technology improves. Permanent camps become more common in particularly productive locations. Artistic expression flourishes in subtle forms that rarely survive, although decorated objects occasionally emerge from waterlogged deposits where oxygen cannot destroy organic materials. These societies are anything but static. Innovation continues quietly across centuries. Yet another profound transformation approaches. Farming begins spreading gradually across Europe from the Near East. It is not a sudden revolution sweeping across the continent in a single wave. Instead, it unfolds unevenly over many generations. Some communities adopt agriculture relatively quickly. Others continue hunting and gathering for centuries alongside neighbouring farmers. Scholars still debate exactly how these interactions unfolded in different regions. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests a long period of cultural blending rather than simple replacement. The arrival of domesticated animals and cultivated crops changes humanity's relationship with the landscape forever. Forests that had reclaimed the land after the Ice Age begin yielding once again, this time not to glaciers but to human hands carrying polished stone axes. Small clearings appear among towering trees. Families sow wheat and barley. Sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle graze where wild animals once roamed freely. The transformation is gradual enough that no individual fully witnesses its entire course. Yet within several centuries the appearance of the countryside changes dramatically. Agriculture brings opportunities that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Food production becomes more predictable, although never entirely secure. Larger populations become possible. Settlements remain occupied for longer periods. Knowledge accumulates within specific places rather than travelling constantly across vast territories. Families begin investing labour into fields, houses, storage pits, and boundaries that future generations inherit. With permanence comes a new understanding of time. People who cultivate crops think not only about tomorrow's hunt, but about next year's harvest and the generation that will inherit the fields. They observe seasonal cycles with increasing precision because success depends upon recognizing subtle environmental patterns. The movement of the sun across the horizon, the lengthening and shortening of daylight, the arrival of spring rains and the turning of the seasons become matters of practical importance as well as spiritual significance. It is within this changing world that monumental construction slowly becomes imaginable. A society struggling merely to survive cannot easily dedicate hundreds of workers to moving enormous stones. But communities capable of producing food surpluses, organizing seasonal gatherings and cooperating across neighboring settlements possess new possibilities. They're still vulnerable to drought, disease, and poor harvests, yet they command resources unimaginable to their ancestors who lived during the height of the Ice Age. Even so, building monuments is never inevitable. Plenty of farming societies never attempt projects on such a scale. Something else is happening beneath the surface, something social as much as economic. Archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that people from wide regions gather periodically for ceremonies, feasts, marriages, exchanges of goods, and shared rituals. Such gatherings strengthen alliances between communities separated by many miles. Exotic materials begin appearing far from their geological origins. Carefully crafted stone axes travel across remarkable distances. Decorative objects circulate through exchange networks linking people who may never permanently live together but nevertheless recognize common traditions. These connections form invisible foundations beneath the visible monument that will eventually emerge. The landscape itself also begins acquiring sacred meaning. Certain hills, rivers, springs, and ancient trees become places where memory accumulates over generations. Burial mounds appear. Ceremonial enclosures are constructed from timber and earth, long before massive stone monuments dominate the countryside. Each generation inherits not only farmland but also places carrying stories, rituals and obligations that bind communities to the past. Remarkably, many of these early ceremonial sites leave only faint traces today. Wooden posts decay, earthen banks erode. Organic materials disappear almost entirely unless preserved under exceptional conditions. Without archaeology, their existence would remain unknown. Modern excavation reveals layer upon layer of forgotten construction beneath later monuments, suggesting that sacred landscapes evolved continuously, rather than appearing fully formed. This slow accumulation of meaning explains why the great monument does not simply occupy an empty field. By the time the first immense stones arrive, the location has already been important for centuries. Countless ceremonies have likely unfolded there. Generations have buried their dead nearby. Seasonal gatherings have woven distant communities into a shared cultural world. The monument becomes the latest expression of a much older tradition, rather than an isolated burst of creativity. History often remembers sudden events, battles, coronations, catastrophes, but prehistoric transformation usually unfolds almost invisibly. Forests spread one tree at a time. Coastlines retreat a few steps each generation. Farming expands from valley to valley. Traditions deepen through repetition rather than revolution. By the time the monument finally begins to rise, the forgotten world that created it has already been thousands of years in the making. No one remembers the names of the first builders. No carved inscription survives to identify the master planner. No royal tomb contains the remains of a ruler who ordered the work to begin. Instead, the monument emerges from a society where achievement appears to belong not to a single individual, but to an entire community. That alone makes it unusual. Much of ancient history is written around powerful kings, wealthy elites, and expanding empires. Here the evidence points towards something quieter, yet no less extraordinary. A world where cooperation itself becomes the greatest source of power. The settlements scattered across the surrounding countryside are modest by later standards. Most houses are built from timber-woven branches, clay and thatched roofs. Their walls rarely survive the passing millennia, leaving only dark stains in the soil where wooden posts once stood. Archaeologists patiently uncover these subtle traces, reconstructing homes that disappeared thousands of years ago. The people living inside them are farmers, herders, craftspeople, hunters, and skilled observers of the natural world. Their villages are not cities, yet neither are they temporary camps. Families return to familiar places year after year, building lives rooted in the changing landscape. Daily existence is demanding but far from simple survival. Before sunrise, livestock require attention. Grain must be stored carefully to protect it from moisture and rodents. Stone tools need sharpening. Clothing woven from plant fibers or animal wool requires constant repair. Every season brings its own responsibilities. Spring means preparing fields. Summer demands endless labor during harvest. Autumn is filled with preserving food for winter, while colder months become a time for repairing equipment, creating tools and reinforcing social bonds through shared gatherings. Life expectancy is shorter than today, but that does not mean life lacks complexity. Older members of the community carry immense value because they remember weather patterns, animal behavior, successful farming practices and traditions passed through countless generations. Without writing, memory itself becomes one of society's most precious resources. Stories are not entertainment alone. They preserve practical knowledge, sacred beliefs, and the identity of the community. Children grow into adulthood surrounded by examples of cooperation. Building even an ordinary house requires many hands. Harvesting grain before storms arrive depends upon neighbors helping one another. caring for livestock during difficult winters becomes a shared responsibility. These habits of collective labor prepare communities for something far larger than any single household could accomplish. Archaeological discoveries increasingly suggest that people travel surprisingly long distances during this period. Stone axes made from distinctive rock types appear hundreds of kilometers from their geological sources. Decorative ornaments crafted from seashells reach inland settlements far from the coast. Rare minerals move between distant regions. Such exchanges reveal networks extending well beyond individual villages. Communities know one another. Alliances exist. Ideas travel alongside objects. This movement is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the people themselves. Modern isotopic analysis of ancient teeth has transformed understanding of prehistoric mobility. Tiny chemical signatures preserved within tooth enamel reflect the geology of the places where individuals spend their childhoods. When researchers compare these signatures with local environments, they sometimes discover that a person buried near the monument grows up hundreds of kilometers away. Others appear to have migrated from entirely different landscapes during adolescence or adulthood. These discoveries challenge older images of isolated prehistoric villages. Instead, they suggest a connected world where marriage, trade pilgrimage, or seasonal gatherings regularly bring people across considerable distances. Some individuals may spend years traveling between communities carrying skills, stories, and traditions with them. Others perhaps arrive only once in a lifetime, participating in ceremonies before returning home with memories that shape future generations. Food also reveals unexpected sophistication. Archaeobotanical evidence shows people cultivate several varieties of grain while continuing to gather wild plants. Cattle become particularly important not only for meat, but also for milk hides and social prestige. Pig remains appear frequently in ceremonial contexts, hinting that large communal feasts accompany significant gatherings. Burned bones, broken pottery, and layers of discarded food surrounding ancient ceremonial sites suggest celebrations involving hundreds, perhaps thousands of participants. Such events likely strengthen relationships between otherwise scattered communities. They are opportunities to arrange marriages, exchange gifts, settle disputes, honor ancestors, and renew shared beliefs. The monument under construction may serve as both destination and symbol, drawing people together across an increasingly interconnected region. Yet organizing such enormous projects still demands remarkable leadership. The evidence does not necessarily point toward absolute rulers commanding unwilling labor. Instead, many archaeologists believe persuasion, religious authority, family alliances, and communal obligation play larger roles. In societies where survival depends upon cooperation, influence may rest less upon military force than upon trust and shared tradition. Exactly how decisions are made remains uncertain. Scholars still debate whether influential ritual specialists guide construction, whether respected elders coordinate labor, or whether authority shifts according to the season and the task at hand. The evidence remains incomplete because wooden meeting places vanish, spoken agreements leave no trace, and social relationships rarely fossilize beneath the soil. Nevertheless, the organization required is undeniable. Imagine hundreds of people arriving from distant settlements carrying food tools and livestock. Temporary camps spread across the landscape. Fires burn throughout the evening. Skilled craftspeople shape stone hammers and wooden sledges, while others prepare rope from plant fibers or animal hides. Experienced workers teach younger generations techniques refined over decades. Every participant understands that the work extends beyond a single season. Many will never see the completed monument. That willingness to labor for a future they may never witness reveals something profound about these forgotten societies. Modern infrastructure often relies upon written contracts, governments, or financial systems. The builders possess none of these. Instead, they depend upon shared belief, inherited obligation and confidence that future generations will continue what earlier generations began. This continuity may explain why the monument evolves gradually rather than appearing all at once. Different construction phases reflect changing priorities and growing ambitions. What begins as earthworks or timber structures slowly expands into increasingly monumental forms. Each generation leaves its own contribution while respecting what already stands. The landscape becomes a living archive recording centuries of collective effort. Remarkably, despite their impressive achievements, these people remain almost invisible within traditional historical narratives. They build no lasting palaces. They mint no coins. They leave no written laws. Their houses decay naturally back into the earth. Their clothing rots away. Their wooden tools disappear almost completely. Had they never constructed the monument, history might scarcely remember they existed at all. Instead, the monument preserves their presence in the most enduring way imaginable. Every carefully placed stone represents thousands of ordinary decisions made by individuals whose names have vanished forever. Someone selects the quarry, someone fashions a hammerstone, someone prepares food for workers, someone cares for children while others travel, someone repairs broken equipment, someone teaches a younger labourer how to balance enormous loads across uneven ground. Great monuments are often described as engineering marvels, but they are equally monuments to countless unseen lives. The builders' history forgot are forgotten only in name. Their habits, skills, cooperation and determination remain embedded within every stone that still stands against the sky. Before the first great blocks begin their astonishing journey across the landscape, an even greater achievement has already taken shape. A society capable of imagining something that would outlive every individual who helped create it. The journey of a single stone begins long before anyone attempts to move it. It starts with a decision that may take years to make one, shaped not only by practical concerns, but by tradition symbolism and an intimate understanding of the landscape. The builders do not simply collect the nearest rocks. They choose particular stones from particular places, suggesting that location matters almost as much as the material itself. Some come from local deposits, while others travel astonishing distances. That choice alone transforms construction into something far more meaningful than an exercise in engineering. Across prehistoric Europe, stone is never just stone. Different formations possess different colours, textures and histories. Certain outcrops dominate the horizon for generations, becoming familiar landmarks long before they are ever quarried. Others emerge from hillsides in places already associated with seasonal gatherings or ancestral traditions. Removing one of these massive blocks may itself be a ceremonial act. Archaeologists cannot know precisely what beliefs accompanied the process, but what survives in the record suggests that the selection of material was deliberate rather than accidental. The first challenge is separating the stone from its natural surroundings. Without iron tools or explosives, the builders rely on patience, observation, and surprisingly effective techniques. They identify natural fractures within the rock, driving wooden wedges into narrow cracks before soaking them with water. As the wood expands, pressure slowly widens existing fissures. Stone hammers made from exceptionally hard rock strike repeatedly against carefully chosen points. The work demands endurance more than brute force. A mistake can ruin months of effort. Once the block finally breaks free, another problem immediately appears. A stone weighing several tons is remarkably difficult to persuade to move even a few meters. Gravity becomes an unyielding opponent. Every uneven slope, muddy patch, or hidden obstacle threatens to halt the journey completely. The builders understand that success depends not on overpowering the landscape but on working with it, Modern experiments have demonstrated that surprisingly simple technologies can accomplish extraordinary tasks when combined with careful planning. Wooden sledges distribute weight across the ground. Rollers fashioned from tree trunks reduce friction on suitable terrain. Thick ropes woven from plant fibers or animal hides allow dozens of people to pull together in coordinated rhythm. Wetting the ground with water or animal fat may reduce resistance under certain conditions, although scholars continue debating exactly how widely such methods were used. No single explanation fully accounts for every stage of transport, because different landscapes demand different solutions. The terrain itself determines much of the strategy. Rivers become invaluable allies. Where possible, stones may travel by water on large timber rafts or boats lashed together into floating platforms. Moving enormous loads across calm rivers often proves easier than dragging them over rough hills. Archaeological evidence increasingly highlights the importance of waterways as prehistoric transportation routes linking distant communities. A river carries not only people and goods, but also ideas, traditions, and perhaps even sacred objects whose journeys possess ritual significance. For stones that must cross land, preparation begins long before movement. Brush is cleared. Temporary paths are reinforced. Dangerous slopes are avoided whenever possible. Teams likely scout routes in advance, identifying obstacles that could become catastrophic once several tons of rock are in motion. Every successful journey reflects countless smaller decisions made weeks or months earlier. It is tempting to imagine hundreds of exhausted workers straining desperately against ropes, but the reality is probably more organized. Coordination matters more than raw strength. Pulling unevenly risks twisting the load or snapping valuable equipment. Experienced leaders likely establish steady rhythms signaling when to pull pause, adjust or reinforce supports beneath the sledge. Children and older members of the community may not participate directly in hauling, yet they contribute by preparing food, repairing ropes, gathering firewood, tending animals, and maintaining temporary camps along the route. The monument, therefore, becomes a project involving nearly every part of society. Construction is not simply about moving stones. It requires agriculture capable of feeding large labor forces, craftspeople able to produce reliable tools, knowledge of timber, suitable for rollers and sledges, and social networks strong enough to encourage cooperation over many seasons. Every successful delivery reflects the invisible labor of hundreds whose hands never actually touch the stone itself. One of the most remarkable discoveries of recent decades concerns the smaller bluestones associated with the monument. Geological analysis strongly indicates that many originate in the Preseli Hills of Western Wales, more than 200 kilometres from their final destination. Exactly how they make this astonishing journey remains one of archaeology's most fascinating puzzles. Most researchers favour a combination of overland transport and river or coastal navigation, although details continue to be debated. The sheer distance emphasises that the builders possess both determination and logistical abilities far beyond what earlier generations of scholars once imagined. Why undertake such an immense effort when similar stones exist closer to the construction site? The practical explanation is unconvincing because transporting distant material creates enormous additional work. Many archaeologists therefore suspect the stones themselves carry symbolic importance connected to the places from which they originate. Perhaps communities in different regions contribute sacred stones to a shared ceremonial centre. Perhaps ancestral traditions link specific landscapes with particular beliefs. The evidence remains incomplete, but the deliberate choice of distant material suggests meaning beyond convenience. Even lifting the stones into their final positions requires remarkable ingenuity. Excavations reveal carefully dug pits with sloping sides. Builders likely raise one end of a stone gradually using timber supports before lowering its base into the prepared hole. Ropes, wooden frames, earthen ramps, and coordinated pulling allow the massive block to rotate slowly into an upright position. Once standing, workers pack the surrounding pit tightly with smaller stones and compacted earth, creating foundations capable of supporting extraordinary weight for thousands of years. The horizontal lintels placed across upright stones demonstrate another level of sophistication. Their builders shape protruding joints on the tops of vertical stones that fit precisely into matching recesses, carved beneath the lintels much like woodworking techniques adapted to stone. Curved lintels are also carefully shaped so that together they form smooth circular arrangements, rather than awkward straight segments. Such precision reveals planning, measurement, and craftsmanship rather than rough improvisation. Every completed stage changes the experience of the landscape. Where once only open sky exists, towering stones now frame the rising sun or cast long shadows across carefully prepared earthworks. Sound behaves differently between standing monoliths. Processional routes acquire new visual rhythms. Ceremonies unfold within spaces deliberately designed to guide movement and attention. Engineering and belief become impossible to separate. Perhaps the greatest achievement is not that prehistoric communities managed to move extraordinary stones, but that they do so repeatedly over generations without abandoning the project. Many individuals who begin the work never witness its completion. Their children inherit unfinished tasks. Their grandchildren refine earlier plans. Through patience measured not in months but in lifetimes, the impossible slowly becomes permanent. Stone by stone, the forgotten builders reshape both the landscape and humanity's understanding of what prehistoric societies are capable of achieving. By the time the last great stones rise into place, the monument is no longer an isolated achievement. It has become the visible heart of an entire ceremonial landscape, stretching far beyond what the eye immediately perceives. A visitor standing among the towering pillars sees only part of the story. Beneath the surrounding fields lie ancient roads, burial mounds, timber circles, processional avenues, pits, ditches, earthworks, and forgotten gathering places that together form one of the most carefully organized sacred environments of prehistoric Europe. The builders do not choose this location simply because it offers enough space. The landscape itself possesses qualities that generations have already come to regard as meaningful. Gentle ridges provide broad views across the surrounding countryside. Nearby rivers create natural routes linking distant communities. The rolling chalk hills drain well after rain, making large gatherings more practical than they would be in wetter terrain. Over centuries, these practical advantages intertwine with memory until geography itself becomes sacred. One of the earliest features is not made from stone at all. Before the famous monument reaches its recognizable form, enormous circular earthworks already define the area. Workers dig deep ditches using tools fashioned from antler picks, shoulder blades of large animals, and carefully shaped stone implements. Every basket of chalk removed from the trench represents physical labor, performed one load at a time. Modern machinery could accomplish the task within days. For the prehistoric builders, it requires months of coordinated effort. The circular enclosure itself carries symbolic weight. Across many prehistoric societies, circles appear repeatedly in ceremonial architecture. They have no obvious beginning or end. Movement through them feels continuous rather than directional. Scholars still debate exactly what these forms represent, but they recur often enough to suggest that circular space holds enduring cultural significance. The monument inherits this tradition, while transforming it into something unprecedented. Within and around these earthworks, archaeologists discover evidence of repeated activity spanning centuries. The site is not built once and then abandoned. it evolves constantly. Timber posts stand where later generations erect stones. Smaller structures give way to more ambitious designs. Pathways are redirected. Burials accumulate. Ritual practices shift with changing beliefs. The sacred landscape behaves almost like a living organism, adapting as each generation contributes something new. Perhaps the most striking feature connecting the monument to the wider world is the great avenue extending from its entrance toward the nearby river. This carefully engineered route is not simply a convenient path. Its alignment appears deliberate, guiding movement through the landscape in a way that combines natural topography with ceremonial purpose. Walking this avenue means approaching the monument gradually, allowing its enormous stones to emerge slowly against the horizon rather than appearing all at once. The river at the avenue's end introduces another layer of meaning. Water occupies a special place in many prehistoric traditions across Europe. Weapons, jewelry, pottery, and other valuable objects are often deposited into rivers, lakes, and wetlands, rather than discarded as waste. Such discoveries suggest that flowing water may serve as a symbolic boundary between different realms of existence, although the precise beliefs remain impossible to reconstruct. If processions move between river and monument, the journey itself may hold spiritual importance equal to any ceremony performed at the destination. The surrounding landscape becomes increasingly crowded with monuments of different kinds. Burial mounds rise across nearby ridges, preserving generations of ancestors within carefully constructed earthworks. Timber circles, now visible only as subtle discolorations in excavated soil, once stand as impressive structures rivaling stone monuments in scale. Large pits arranged in geometric patterns hint at ceremonies whose meanings remain elusive. Every discovery reveals another layer beneath the visible surface. One remarkable aspect of this landscape is how carefully different features relate to one another. They are not scattered randomly. Distances, orientations, and alignments repeatedly suggest intentional planning. Certain avenues connect specific monuments. Some structures appear positioned to frame distant hills or the course of the river. Others align with seasonal events in the sky, particularly the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset. These astronomical relationships have fascinated researchers for generations. It is important, however, to separate established evidence from speculation. The monument undeniably aligns with significant solar events. During the summer solstice, the rising sun appears along its principal axis. During the winter solstice, the setting sun occupies the opposite alignment. This relationship is well supported archaeologically. What remains uncertain is exactly how the builders interpret these celestial moments. Scholars still debate whether the alignments primarily regulate agricultural calendars, reinforce ceremonial gatherings, symbolize cycles of life and death, or combine several meanings simultaneously. The evidence remains incomplete because no written explanations survive. What is clear is that prehistoric communities possess an exceptionally careful awareness of the sky. Long before telescopes or mathematical astronomy, generations observed the changing positions of sunrise and sunset across the horizon. Such knowledge develops through patient observation repeated year after year. Farmers benefit from understanding seasonal change. Ritual specialists may also connect celestial cycles with communal ceremonies. The monument transforms these observations into architecture, embedding time itself within stone. Excavations around nearby settlements reveal another fascinating dimension of the sacred landscape. Animal bones recovered from feasting sites indicate enormous communal gatherings during particular seasons. Many pigs are slaughtered in late autumn or early winter, suggesting that people converge upon the area when daylight grows shortest. Isotopic studies of livestock indicate some animals travel considerable distances before being consumed, implying that families journey from across broad regions to participate. Imagine the scene. Temporary camps spread across the hills, smoke rises from hundreds of cooking fires, livestock crowd makeshift enclosures. Craftspeople repair tools while traders exchange rare materials collected from distant places. Children encounter relatives they may see only once each year. Songs, ceremonies, storytelling, marriages, negotiations, and remembrance of ancestors all become woven into days of collective celebration. The monument stands at the centre, not merely as a backdrop, but as the enduring focus around which countless human lives briefly intersect. The contrast between permanence and impermanence becomes striking. Houses are temporary, wooden structures eventually decay, fires burn out within hours, gatherings disperse after days or weeks, yet the stones remain fixed, silently recording each generation's return. Their endurance creates continuity across centuries, allowing people separated by time to participate in traditions larger than themselves. Modern archaeological techniques continue revealing hidden features that earlier researchers never suspected. Ground-penetrating radar magnetometry, aerial photography, and laser scanning expose buried ditches, ancient pathways, and subtle earthworks invisible from ground level. Each new survey expands the known ceremonial landscape, demonstrating that what survives above ground represents only a fraction of the original complex. The monument is not an isolated masterpiece. It is the surviving centerpiece of an immense cultural landscape, whose full scale is only now becoming visible. As the sacred world surrounding the stones reaches its greatest extent, it also reaches a delicate balance. Communities remain connected through shared traditions, seasonal gatherings, and inherited beliefs. Yet beyond the horizon, social and environmental changes are quietly gathering strength. The landscape that nurtures this extraordinary monument will not remain unchanged forever. The stones stand in plain view, but the most revealing evidence lies beneath them. Almost everything archaeologists know about the forgotten builders comes not from towering monuments, but from fragments so small that they are easily overlooked. A burned seed no larger than a fingernail, a stain left by a decayed wooden post, microscopic grains of pollen trapped within ancient soil, or the worn surface of a discarded stone tool can reshape an entire understanding of prehistoric life. The monument dominates the landscape, yet the hidden clues beneath the ground give it meaning. Early excavators often search for spectacular discoveries. They hope to uncover treasures, royal burials, or inscriptions that would immediately explain the site's purpose. Instead, many of the most important breakthroughs emerge through patient recording of ordinary details. Modern archaeology increasingly resembles forensic science. Every layer of soil is treated as evidence. Every fragment is mapped, photographed, and analyzed before being removed. The process is slow because once excavation destroys a layer, it can never be reconstructed. One of the earlier surprises comes from the monument's surrounding ditch. Rather than being filled quickly by natural erosion, parts of it contain carefully placed deposits of animal bones, stone tools, antlers, and human remains. These are not random accumulations of rubbish. Many appear deliberately arranged, suggesting that the ditch itself continues to serve ceremonial purposes long after its construction. The builders are not simply creating boundaries, they are continually interacting with them. Among the most remarkable discoveries are the antler picks used to dig the original earthworks. At first glance, these tools appear unremarkable, fashioned from the naturally shed antlers of red deer. Yet they become invaluable to archaeologists because they can be dated using radiocarbon analysis. Organic materials preserve traces of radioactive carbon that slowly decay over time. By measuring what remains, scientists estimate when the antlers belonged to living animals, and by extension when they were used in construction. Radiocarbon dating revolutionizes understanding of the monument. Earlier generations often assume it is built during a single period, Instead, dates reveal multiple construction phases spread across many centuries. Earthworks come first. Timber structures appear and disappear. Stones are added, rearranged, and modified over generations. The monument grows gradually shaped by people separated by lifetimes, rather than united within a single grand project. Human remains provide another window into this forgotten world. Cremated bone fragments discovered within and around the monument suggest that it serves, at least during certain periods, as an important place for burial. Some of these remains belong to adults, others to younger individuals. The number of burials indicates that only a small portion of the surrounding population is interred here, implying that access may be restricted according to social, familial, or ritual criteria. Scholars still debate exactly who receives this honour. The evidence remains incomplete because cremation destroys many biological details that modern scientists would otherwise analyse. Even so, remarkable advances continue. Tiny surviving fragments of bone occasionally preserve enough information for isotopic analysis. Chemical signatures reveal aspects of ancient diet, indicating the balance between plant foods, domesticated animals, and occasionally wild resources. In some cases, isotopes also suggest where individuals spend different stages of their lives, demonstrating that not everyone buried near the monument grows up locally. Some travel considerable distances before death, reinforcing the growing picture of extensive prehistoric connections. Ancient teeth prove especially valuable. Enamel forms during childhood and remains chemically stable throughout life. As it develops, it absorbs trace elements from drinking water and local geology. Thousands of years later, these microscopic signatures remain locked inside. Scientists compare them with geological maps identifying probable childhood regions for individual people. The results are often astonishing. Some individuals buried near the monument originate from landscapes hundreds of kilometers away. These findings reshape old assumptions. Rather than serving only nearby villages, the ceremonial complex appears to attract people from across much of prehistoric Britain and perhaps beyond. Pilgrimage, seasonal gathering, marriage alliances, or other forms of long-distance movement all become increasingly plausible explanations. The monument belongs to a much wider cultural world than earlier scholars imagined. Plant remains offer equally important clues. Charred grains preserved in ancient hearths reveal cultivated wheat and barley. Hazelnut shells appear in abundance, reminding researchers that wild foods remain significant even after farming becomes established. Tiny pollen grains extracted from buried sediments reconstruct changing vegetation over centuries. They show forests gradually giving way to more open landscapes shaped by grazing animals and cultivated fields. This transformation is not sudden. It reflects generations of careful land management surrounding the ceremonial center. Animal bones tell stories of their own. Cattle dominate some deposits while pigs become particularly common in others. Careful examination of teeth indicates the age at which animals are slaughtered. Seasonal growth patterns suggest many are killed during winter gatherings, supporting the idea of large communal feasts associated with important ceremonies. Cut marks left by stone tools reveal skilled butchery rather than hurried consumption. These are organized events requiring preparation, planning, and cooperation. Microscopic analysis pushes the investigation even further. Soil samples examined under powerful microscopes contain tiny charcoal particles, fungal spores, insect remains, and mineral traces invisible to the naked eye. Together they reveal where fires burn repeatedly, where livestock gather, where wooden structures once stand, and even how rainfall affects different parts of the site over centuries. Entire chapters of prehistoric activity emerge from evidence measured in fractions of a millimeter. Technology continues expanding what buried clues can reveal. Ancient DNA recovered from human remains has begun transforming the study of prehistoric populations. Genetic analysis demonstrates that the arrival of farming in Britain involved significant migration, as well as cultural exchange. Later population shifts introduce additional complexity. These discoveries remind researchers that prehistoric societies are dynamic rather than isolated. Communities change through movement, interaction, and adaptation across generations. Yet despite all these scientific advances, the evidence retains important limits. DNA cannot explain belief systems. Radiocarbon dates reveal when something happens, not why. Isotopes identify movement, but rarely the motivations behind it. Archaeologists reconstruct patterns with increasing confidence, but human intentions remain more elusive. No laboratory test can determine exactly what participants think as they gather beneath towering stones during the shortest days of winter or the longest days of summer. This balance between knowledge and uncertainty gives the monument much of its enduring fascination. Every decade brings remarkable discoveries that earlier researchers would have considered impossible. At the same time, each breakthrough exposes fresh mysteries. A newly identified traveller raises questions about forgotten roots. A precisely dated burial challenges earlier chronologies. A hidden timber circle revealed through geophysical survey suggests ceremonies that leave almost no other trace. The monument is therefore never truly finished, not only for its prehistoric builders who reshape it across centuries, but also for modern archaeology. Beneath every layer already excavated lie countless others still waiting to speak. The forgotten builders leave no written history, yet they scatter enough fragments across the landscape that patient science can slowly assemble echoes of their vanished world, one grain of soil at a time. The monument commands attention because of its towering stones, but stones never build themselves. Behind every carefully shaped block stands a human life, and behind every human life lies a routine that rarely survives in history. The forgotten builders spend far more time planting crops, tending animals, raising children, repairing houses, and preparing meals than they do hauling massive rocks across the countryside. Their greatest achievement depends upon thousands of ordinary days that leave only the faintest traces beneath the soil. As dawn spreads across the chalk hills, smoke begins rising from scattered settlements. The houses are built with sturdy timber posts supporting walls woven from flexible branches and coated with clay mixed with straw. Thick thatched roofs protect families from rain and winter winds. Inside, the central hearth provides warmth, light, and a place for preparing food. The walls may be decorated with simple woven items, tools, baskets, and hides, but almost everything organic eventually disappears after thousands of years. Archaeologists reconstruct these homes from post-holes fragments of burned clay and occasional impressions left where wooden beams once stood. The people who wake inside these houses already understand the rhythm of the seasons. Every task has its proper time. Spring is devoted to clearing fields, repairing fences, and preparing soil for planting. Summer demands long days harvesting grain before storms can destroy months of work. Autumn is filled with preserving food, storing crops, and selecting animals that will be slaughtered before winter. During the colder months, attention turns toward repairing tools, weaving textiles, shaping timber, and crafting objects that cannot easily be made during the busy agricultural season. Life is physically demanding, yet it is supported by generations of accumulated knowledge. Farmers know which fields drain well after heavy rain, and which should be avoided during wetter years. Herders understand the grazing habits of cattle and sheep across different landscapes. Craftspeople recognize which trees produce the strongest timber, which stones fracture predictably into useful tools, and which plants yield fibers suitable for rope or woven cloth. None of this knowledge exists in written manuals. It survives entirely because older generations patiently teach younger ones. Children begin learning almost from the moment they are able to walk. They observe adults repairing fences, tending livestock, grinding grain, collecting firewood, and shaping stone. Practical skills are passed along naturally through participation rather than formal instruction. By adolescence, many young people already possess abilities that modern specialists spend years studying. They can identify edible plants, track animals, predict changing weather, and recognize suitable materials for countless everyday tasks. Food preparation occupies an enormous portion of daily life. Grain harvested during summer must be processed continuously throughout the year. Women and men alike likely participate in grinding cereals using heavy stone querns, although the exact division of labor remains uncertain. Archaeologists often discover worn grinding stones, whose smooth surfaces testify to countless hours of repetitive work. Fine flour becomes porridge, coarse bread, or other simple meals that provide essential calories for physically demanding labor. Animal husbandry becomes equally important. Cattle represent more than a source of meat. They provide milk, leather bone for tools, and perhaps even social prestige. Owning large herds may symbolize wealth within the community. Sheep contribute wool that can be spun into thread and woven into increasingly sophisticated textiles. Pigs reproduce quickly and are especially valuable for communal feasts. Dogs assist with herding hunting and protecting settlements, becoming trusted companions whose presence occasionally appears in archaeological burials. Health remains unpredictable. A minor injury can become life-threatening without modern medicine. Dental disease is common as farming increases reliance on starchy foods. Arthritis develops from decades of repetitive labor. Broken bones occasionally heal surprisingly well, indicating that injured individuals receive care from others during recovery. Such evidence offers quiet testimony to compassion within prehistoric communities. People who can no longer contribute fully through physical labor are not necessarily abandoned. They continue living because others support them. One lesser-known discovery challenges long-held assumptions about these societies. Chemical analysis of pottery reveals traces of dairy products showing that milk and milk-derived foods become increasingly important. Some prehistoric populations gradually develop greater tolerance for digesting lactose into adulthood, although this genetic adaptation spreads slowly over many generations. The archaeological record captures a fascinating moment when cultural practices such as dairying begin changing human biology itself through natural selection. Craft production occupies many skilled individuals throughout the year. Flint knappers transform carefully selected stone into razor-sharp blades capable of cutting meat-scraping hides or shaping wood with astonishing efficiency. Potters gather suitable clay, mixing it with crushed stone or organic temper before carefully forming vessels by hand. Firing pottery successfully requires experience. Too much heat causes cracking, too little leaves, fragile containers unable to withstand everyday use. Each successful pot reflects expertise acquired through years of practice. Textiles rarely survive archaeologically, yet indirect evidence suggests weaving becomes increasingly sophisticated. Loom weights, spindle whorls, and impressions preserved in clay hint at garments far more varied than simple animal skins. Wool, flax, and plant fibers provide materials for clothing suited to different seasons and activities. Decorative patterns may communicate family identity, regional traditions, or social status, though these details remain beyond the reach of surviving evidence. Life is not consumed entirely by work. Archaeological discoveries suggest opportunities for celebration music, storytelling, and ritual. Bone flutes discovered elsewhere in prehistoric Europe demonstrate that musical traditions extend deep into humanity's past. Decorative objects carved from stone, bone, or amber indicate an appreciation for beauty alongside practicality. Children undoubtedly play games whose rules are forever lost. Elders recount ancestral stories beside evening fires, preserving community memory without realizing that none of their words will survive. Death remains a familiar presence. Average life expectancy is lower than today, largely because infant mortality is high and disease is difficult to treat. Yet those who survive childhood often reach mature adulthood. Burial practices vary across time and place, reflecting changing beliefs about ancestors and the afterlife. Some individuals are cremated, others receive different forms of burial. Scholars still debate what these variations signify, but they clearly reveal evolving spiritual traditions rather than fixed customs. When the time arrives to continue work on the monument, these ordinary lives briefly converge. Farmers leave their fields after harvest. Craftspeople carry specialized tools. Families bring livestock and stored food to support large gatherings. Young adults work beside experienced builders, learning techniques they will eventually teach to the next generation. The monument is therefore not separate from everyday existence. It grows directly out of it. This realization changes how the stones are viewed. They are not the products of an anonymous workforce driven by distant rulers. They are the cumulative achievement of people whose daily routines are filled with familiar concerns: feeding children, repairing homes, caring for aging relatives, preparing for winter, and hoping that the coming harvest will be kind. Their names disappear, but the quiet rhythm of their lives remains preserved within every carefully placed stone. Long after their houses return to earth, the monument continues standing as the most enduring reflection of countless ordinary people whose extraordinary cooperation becomes their greatest legacy. Nothing in the prehistoric world remains unchanged forever. The same landscape that once nurtures the forgotten builders slowly begins to shift beneath their feet, not through a single dramatic catastrophe, but through generations of subtle transformations that few individuals fully recognize while they are happening. The monument continues to dominate the horizon, yet the society surrounding it is quietly becoming something different from the one that first imagined its construction. Climate is one of the first forces to leave its mark. Compared with the violent changes that end the last ice age, these fluctuations appear modest. But for farming communities, even small variations in rainfall temperature or growing seasons can have profound consequences. A succession of unusually wet years may reduce harvests. Drier conditions can alter grazing patterns. Rivers rise and fall in ways that affect travel fishing and access to fresh water. Archaeological evidence from pollen records, peat deposits, and ancient sediments suggests that prehistoric people repeatedly adapt to changing environmental conditions rather than living within a stable natural world. The forests also continue evolving. Generations of woodland clearance create increasingly open landscapes. Fields expand gradually across hillsides once covered by dense stands of oak and elm. Livestock graze in areas that earlier ancestors know only as woodland. This transformation is not purely destructive. Managed landscapes provide valuable pasture and farmland supporting larger populations. Yet every cleared forest changes local ecosystems, affecting wildlife, soil stability, and water movement across the countryside. Around the monument, evidence suggests that ceremonial gatherings remain important, but they no longer look exactly as they once did. Archaeologists notice subtle shifts in the kinds of artifacts deposited, the forms of burial practiced, and the structures being constructed. Timber circles that once serve as central ritual spaces begin disappearing from use. Some earthworks are modified while others gradually fall into disrepair. The sacred landscape is still alive, but its traditions are evolving. One particularly revealing change appears in burial customs. Earlier generations often favour collective monuments, where communities share ceremonial spaces connected with ancestors. Over time, however, more emphasis begins appearing on individual burial mounds scattered across the landscape. These impressive earthen barrows become highly visible landmarks, each commemorating particular people, rather than larger communal identities. Scholars still debate exactly why this shift occurs. Some suggest that emerging social differences place greater importance on influential families or individuals. Others argue that changing religious beliefs reshape how communities understand ancestry and memory. The archaeological evidence supports the existence of change, but no single explanation fully accounts for its complexity. Trade networks also expand in surprising ways. Objects made from materials found hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away begin appearing with increasing frequency. Amber from the Baltic coast, finely crafted stone axes, decorative ornaments, and eventually the earliest metal objects travel across Europe through networks of exchange that connect communities far beyond their immediate neighbours. These items are not merely practical possessions. They likely communicate status relationships and participation within increasingly complex social worlds. The arrival of metallurgy introduces another quiet revolution. Copper objects first appear as rare and valuable curiosities rather than replacements for stone tools. Early metal is difficult to produce and often softer than carefully worked flint. For generations, polished stone axes remain highly effective. Nevertheless, metal carries symbolic significance because of its rarity and unfamiliar appearance. Communities begin experimenting with entirely new technologies, opening possibilities that will eventually transform prehistoric society. The forgotten builders find themselves living at the edge of two different worlds. Their ancestors inherit traditions rooted in stone, timber, earth, and collective ritual. Their descendants will increasingly inhabit societies shaped by bronze, expanding trade, and changing social structures. The monument itself stands directly between these eras, belonging completely to neither. Agriculture continues becoming more productive in some regions, allowing populations to grow. Larger communities create opportunities, but also new pressures. More mouths require more farmland. Competition over resources may intensify. Land that once supports only scattered settlements now becomes increasingly valuable. Archaeological surveys reveal expanding patterns of occupation across many landscapes, suggesting that human influence reaches farther than ever before. Diet changes as well. Analysis of human bones indicates subtle variations in nutrition across different periods. Some communities appear increasingly dependent upon cultivated crops, while others continue balancing farming with hunting, fishing, and gathering wild foods. Regional diversity remains considerable. Prehistoric Britain is not a single unified culture, but a mosaic of traditions adapting differently to local environments. The monument reflects these changing priorities. Construction does not stop abruptly. Instead, activity becomes less intensive over time. Certain features are modified while others are left untouched. Some stones are repositioned, new burials appear nearby. Ceremonial use continues, but the enormous building campaigns that characterize earlier centuries gradually diminish. It is as though later generations inherit an extraordinary sacred place, but feel less compelled to reshape it dramatically. One fascinating clue comes from animal remains recovered near ceremonial sites. Earlier phases often contain evidence of immense communal feasts involving livestock brought from distant regions. Later deposits sometimes suggest gatherings that are smaller or organized differently. Whether this reflects declining participation, changing ritual practices, or broader social transformation remains uncertain. The evidence offers intriguing patterns, but not definitive answers. Meanwhile, the wider European world grows increasingly interconnected. Ideas travel alongside people. Technological innovations spread gradually from one community to another. Artistic styles evolve. Exchange networks become more extensive. Communities that once defined themselves primarily through local traditions now participate in cultural systems stretching across remarkable distances. The forgotten builders are no longer isolated within their own landscape. They become part of a continent experiencing slow but profound transformation. Even the monument's symbolic meaning may begin changing. Structures often outlive the intentions of those who build them. A sacred place created for one purpose can acquire entirely new significance generations later. Modern cathedrals sometimes stand upon earlier temples. Ancient roads become medieval pilgrimage routes. Likewise, prehistoric monuments may be reinterpreted repeatedly as beliefs evolve. People continue gathering there not because they perfectly remember its original purpose, but because centuries of tradition have already established the place itself as sacred. This gradual reinterpretation explains why the monument survives changing societies. Its exact meaning can shift without diminishing its importance. Every generation inherits both the stones and the mystery surrounding them. Familiar rituals may be replaced by new ceremonies while the landscape continues serving as a powerful anchor for collective memory. The transformation unfolding across these centuries is almost invisible when viewed through a single lifetime. A child born at the beginning of this period grows old believing the world remains fundamentally familiar. Yet from the perspective of archaeology, profound change is underway. Technologies evolve. Social relationships become more complex. Long-distance connections expand. Religious traditions adapt. Environmental conditions fluctuate. The monument remains constant, but the civilization around it slowly becomes something its earliest builders could scarcely have imagined. The forgotten world has not yet disappeared. Its foundations are still strong. But the quiet forces of history, migration, innovation, shifting beliefs and changing landscapes are already preparing the conditions that will eventually carry the original builders beyond memory, leaving only their extraordinary monument to speak on their behalf. The disappearance of the builders is not marked by a single year, a final battle, or a catastrophic event preserved in memory. There is no dramatic ending in which an invading army destroys the monument or an earthquake wipes an entire society from existence overnight. Instead, the people who first imagined, shape and raise the great stones slowly dissolve into history through a process so gradual that they likely never realize it is happening. Their descendants continue living across the landscape, but they no longer think exactly as their ancestors do. Their beliefs shift, their priorities change, their world expands. Eventually, the original community ceases to exist not because every person dies, but because its identity transforms into something new. This kind of disappearance is surprisingly common in prehistory. Modern history often emphasizes the collapse of empires. Rome falls, kingdoms fragment, dynasties end. Written records preserve names, dates, and political events. Prehistoric societies rarely leave such convenient milestones. Instead, archaeologists observe changing pottery styles, different burial customs, altered settlement patterns, and new technologies gradually replacing older traditions. The people themselves do not vanish biologically. They simply become someone else over many generations. Around the monument, this transformation unfolds quietly. Some ceremonial spaces fall out of regular use. Others remain important but acquire different meanings. The enormous communal building projects that once unite distant communities become increasingly rare. New monuments appear elsewhere, reflecting changing regional identities. The landscape remains inhabited, yet its cultural center of gravity slowly shifts. One important factor is the growing influence of metalworking. Bronze technology spreads gradually across Britain and much of Europe during the second millennium before the Common Era. Bronze tools and weapons are stronger and more durable than many earlier stone implements. Producing them requires specialized knowledge, long-distance trade, and access to valuable raw materials such as copper and tin. Communities increasingly participate in exchange networks that stretch across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. These expanding connections alter society in subtle but significant ways. Earlier generations organize enormous collective efforts centered on ceremonial landscapes and shared ritual traditions. Bronze Age communities begin placing greater emphasis on skilled craftspeople, valuable portable objects, and regional exchange. Wealth becomes easier to display through personal possessions rather than purely through participation in communal construction. Archaeologists discover increasing numbers of carefully crafted bronze axes, swords, ornaments, and tools deposited in rivers, bogs, and ceremonial locations. These objects suggest that ritual continues playing an important role, but its expression evolves. Stone monuments no longer occupy the same central position they once did. Population movement may also contribute to changing identities. Recent advances in ancient DNA have revealed that prehistoric Europe experiences several major waves of migration over thousands of years. One particularly significant movement occurs during the later Neolithic and early Bronze Age, when people associated with pastoral cultures originating farther east expand across much of Europe. Genetic evidence indicates that Britain is profoundly affected by this migration. This discovery surprises many researchers. For decades, archaeologists debate whether cultural change occurs mainly through the spread of ideas or through the movement of people themselves. Ancient DNA demonstrates that both processes play important roles. Communities connected with earlier monumental traditions gradually intermingle with newcomers, bringing different technologies, customs, and social structures. Importantly, this does not mean that one population simply replaces another overnight. Human history is rarely so simple. Migration often involves generations of interaction, intermarriage, adaptation, cooperation, and occasional conflict. Families blend traditions. Children inherit mixed cultural identities. Languages evolve. Religious beliefs merge, compete, or disappear. Over centuries, entirely new societies emerge from combinations of older ones. The builders of the monument are therefore not erased in a biological sense. Much of their ancestry continues through later populations. Their descendants walk the same valleys, cultivate nearby fields, and perhaps still visit the ancient stones. Yet the cultural world that originally inspires the monument gradually fades beyond recognition. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from changing settlement patterns. Archaeological surveys indicate that some earlier ceremonial centres receive less sustained attention, while new settlements develop in different locations. Communities become increasingly tied to agricultural production, regional trade, and local political relationships rather than vast ceremonial gathering places. The monument remains respected, but daily life increasingly revolves around other concerns. Memory itself becomes fragile. Without writing, historical knowledge survives only through continuous storytelling. Every generation must actively preserve the past for the next. If even a few generations stop repeating certain stories, entire chapters of history can disappear forever. Imagine a child visiting the monument 500 years after its completion. Their grandparents know that important ceremonies still occur there, but perhaps they no longer remember why particular stones come from distant mountains. They understand that ancestors gather at the site, yet the original reasons for certain alignments have become uncertain. Another 300 years pass. The ceremonies change again. New myths replace fading traditions. Eventually, no living person can accurately explain who first builds the monument. This gradual loss of memory may be inevitable. Even today, traditions disappear surprisingly quickly when they are no longer practiced. Languages become extinct within a few generations. Craft techniques vanish after the last skilled artisan dies. Oral histories can preserve astonishing detail for centuries, but they require constant renewal. Once interrupted, they fade with remarkable speed. The monument itself contributes to this transformation in an unexpected way. Its sheer durability allows later generations to reinterpret it repeatedly. Unlike a wooden structure that decays within decades, stone survives almost unchanged. Every new culture inherits the same physical landscape, but views it through different beliefs. A sacred temple may become an ancestral shrine. An ancestral shrine may become a place associated with legendary heroes. Centuries later, it may be considered the work of supernatural beings. Each reinterpretation adds another layer while simultaneously obscuring earlier meanings. Archaeologists sometimes refer to monuments as persistent places because they continue attracting human attention long after their original purpose has been forgotten. The monument exemplifies this perfectly. Its builders disappear, but the stones continue influencing human imagination for thousands of years. Nature also participates in the slow transformation. Grass grows over abandoned earthworks. Rain softens the edges of ancient ditches. Trees occasionally take root near ceremonial spaces before later generations clear them again. Wind carries soil across forgotten pathways. Animals burrow through layers containing traces of human activity. Nothing remains frozen in time. Yet remarkably, the monument survives. Its massive stones resist weathering far better than timber houses or woven fences. Their foundations remain stable despite centuries of frost and rain. While villages vanish almost completely, the Great Circle continues standing against the changing sky. This imbalance shapes everything that follows. Future generations inherit an extraordinary structure without inheriting the society that creates it. They see the achievement, but not the process. They witness the result while the builders themselves fade into anonymity. History has not forgotten because the monument is unimportant. History has forgotten because memory proves far more fragile than stone. The civilization that raises these immense blocks does not collapse in fire or disappear beneath floodwaters. Instead, it accomplishes something almost paradoxical. It creates one of humanity's most enduring monuments, while gradually allowing its own identity to dissolve into the flow of time. The builders vanish so completely that later peoples can scarcely believe ordinary humans are responsible at all, opening the door for legends that will soon become more famous than the forgotten truth. Once the true builders slip beyond living memory, imagination begins filling the empty space they leave behind. Human beings rarely accept unexplained monuments without inventing stories to match their scale. When ordinary experience offers no obvious answer, myth becomes an irresistible explanation. Across thousands of years, the great stones gather layer after layer of legend, until the forgotten community that actually raises them becomes almost invisible beneath centuries of storytelling. This transformation begins long before written history reaches the landscape. Every generation inherits the monument already standing. Children ask who built it. Parents answer using whatever traditions survive. As centuries pass, those explanations drift further from historical reality. Details are forgotten, simplified, embellished, or merged with entirely different tales. Oral traditions are remarkably resilient, but they are also living things. They adapt to changing beliefs and new cultural worlds. By the time literate societies begin recording local traditions, the original memory has almost certainly vanished. Some of the earliest written references come not from people who witnessed the monument's construction, but from observers living thousands of years later. To them the stones already seem unimaginably ancient. Their age alone demands extraordinary explanations. One recurring theme appears across many cultures confronted with mysterious prehistoric monuments. Giants, enormous stones seem to require enormous builders. If ordinary people cannot imagine moving blocks weighing many tons without modern machinery, then perhaps beings of impossible strength must have done so. The logic feels intuitive, even if it has no archaeological support. Throughout Europe, megalithic monuments become associated with races of giants, whose existence belongs more to folklore than history. Another explanation attributes the monument to powerful magicians. In medieval Britain, one of the most influential legends links the stones with Merlin, the legendary advisor of King Arthur. According to later versions of the story, Merlin transports magical stones from Ireland, using supernatural powers before arranging them on the Salisbury Plain. The tale is rich with imagination and symbolism, yet historians recognize it as medieval literature rather than historical evidence. Its popularity, however, reveals something important. People living during the Middle Ages genuinely struggle to explain how prehistoric communities accomplish such extraordinary engineering. Without archaeological excavation or modern scientific dating, the monument appears disconnected from any recognizable historical society. Magic seems more believable than forgotten farmers possessing remarkable organizational skill. Other traditions imagine that the stones are left by ancient heroes, mysterious kings, or civilizations destroyed by divine punishment. Some stories connect the monument with healing powers. Others describe it as the work of mythical races living before ordinary humanity. Although these explanations differ dramatically, they all share one characteristic: they replace anonymous cooperation with extraordinary individuals or supernatural forces. Ironically, the real story is arguably more impressive. The forgotten builders achieve something that no legendary giant accomplishes. They organize peaceful cooperation across generations without leaving behind empires, armies, or written laws. Their success depends upon patience rather than magic. The arrival of the Romans adds another chapter. When Roman writers encounter Britain, the monument is already ancient beyond memory. Some classical authors speculate about the religious practices of the island's inhabitants, particularly groups later associated with the Druids. Because the monument possesses obvious ceremonial qualities, later generations begin linking it with Druids, despite a significant chronological problem. Modern archaeology makes the timeline clear. The principal phases of the monument are completed roughly 2,000 years before the historical Druids described by Roman sources. This enormous gap means that Druids cannot have built the structure. They may well have visited it, respected it, or incorporated it into their own traditions, but the evidence overwhelmingly indicates that the monument already stands for many centuries before Druids appear in the historical record. Even so, the association remains remarkably persistent. Today, many people still connect the monument primarily with Druids, especially during seasonal gatherings. This illustrates how powerful cultural memory can become once a compelling story takes root. A narrative does not need to be historically accurate to endure. During the medieval period, the monument continues attracting travelers, chroniclers, and local communities. Its stones inspire awe precisely because their origin remains mysterious. Some observers attempt practical explanations. Others repeat older legends with additional embellishments. Every retelling reshapes the story slightly. Meanwhile, the monument itself remains silent. Weather gradually alters its appearance. Some stones fall, others lean noticeably. Earth slowly accumulates around their bases. Lichens spread across exposed surfaces. The once carefully maintained ceremonial landscape becomes partly obscured beneath centuries of farming and natural change. Yet even in altered form, the monument retains enough grandeur to dominate the surrounding plain. One fascinating aspect of these evolving legends is how they often preserve emotional truth while losing historical accuracy. The stories consistently recognize that the monument is extraordinary. They acknowledge that enormous effort is required. They emphasize its sacred character. They portray it as older than living memory. In those respects, they are surprisingly close to reality. Where they diverge is in identifying the builders. Rather than accepting that ordinary prehistoric communities possess exceptional abilities, later generations repeatedly substitute mythical beings, legendary rulers, or supernatural intervention. This tendency is not unique to one monument. Across the world, impressive prehistoric architecture often becomes separated from its original creators. Ancient earthworks are attributed to lost civilizations. Massive walls are credited to giants. Sophisticated engineering is explained through divine assistance. Again and again, historical memory underestimates the capabilities of prehistoric societies. Part of this misunderstanding reflects changing technology. People living in later periods judge earlier communities according to their own assumptions. If they themselves rely upon iron tools, wheeled vehicles, written records, or centralized governments, they naturally assume such achievements are impossible without similar institutions. They overlook the extraordinary effectiveness of cooperation, accumulated practical knowledge, and careful planning. Archaeology has spent more than a century reversing these misconceptions. Excavation reveals antler picks instead of magical staffs. Radiocarbon dating replaces legendary chronologies. Geological analysis traces stones back to real quarries rather than enchanted mountains. Human remains demonstrate genuine communities rather than mythical races. Each scientific discovery gently peels away another layer of legend, revealing the forgotten builders beneath. Yet the legends themselves remain valuable, not because they explain construction, but because they reveal how successive societies understand the past. Every age recreates ancient monuments according to its own imagination. Medieval writers see Christian morality and legendary kings. Romantic poets see mysterious ruins. Victorian antiquarians search for heroic ancestors. Modern researchers apply lasers, DNA analysis, satellite mapping, and microscopic chemistry. The monument changes very little. Human interpretation changes constantly. Perhaps that is one reason the stones continue holding such fascination. They function almost like a mirror. Every civilization standing before them sees not only the ancient past, but also its own assumptions about history, knowledge, and human possibility. The forgotten builders remain invisible, not because they leave no evidence, but because later generations repeatedly replace them with stories that feel more familiar than the remarkable truth. The greatest mystery is no longer how the monument is built. It is how easily humanity forgets the achievements of ordinary people and replaces them with legends powerful enough to outlive history itself. For centuries, the monument stands in plain sight, yet remarkably little is truly known about it. Travelers sketch its towering stones. Antiquarians measure its dimensions with admirable dedication. Local traditions continue weaving stories around its origins. But until archaeology matures into a scientific discipline, the monument remains more a symbol than a source of reliable historical knowledge. Its greatest secrets are not hidden because they are deeply buried. They are hidden because no one yet knows how to ask the right questions. The earliest serious investigators approached the site with genuine curiosity, even if their methods often seem crude by modern standards. During the 17th century, scholars begin producing increasingly accurate drawings and measurements. Rather than treating the monument simply as a legendary relic, they attempt to document what actually stands before them. Every sketch preserves details that later become unexpectedly valuable, because the stones themselves continue changing through weather, erosion, and occasional collapse. Among these early observers is the English architect Inigo Jones, who proposes that the monument must be Roman. His conclusion reflects the thinking of his time. The Romans are widely recognized as capable engineers whose roads, bridges and buildings still dominate parts of Britain. Faced with an extraordinary structure, Jones naturally attributes it to the most technically advanced civilization familiar to him. Today, archaeology demonstrates that this interpretation is incorrect by nearly 2,000 years, yet Jones deserves more credit than simple dismissal. His work illustrates an important stage in the development of historical thinking. Rather than relying entirely upon folklore, he searches for practical human explanations. Even though he identifies the wrong builders, he moves the conversation away from pure mythology towards systematic investigation. Other antiquarians reach very different conclusions. Some continue associating the monument with druids. Others imagine it as a temple dedicated to forgotten gods. Still others argue that it commemorates ancient victories or royal burials. Without reliable dating methods, every theory depends largely upon comparison intuition and historical imagination. The 19th century introduces dramatic changes. Archaeology gradually transforms from treasure hunting into careful scientific excavation. Researchers begin recording precisely where objects are found rather than simply collecting impressive artifacts. Soil layers receive increasing attention. Context becomes as important as the discoveries themselves. This shift proves revolutionary. A single flint tool means relatively little if removed without documentation. The same tool carefully recorded within a specific layer beneath a known feature becomes part of a chronological sequence capable of revealing when and how different parts of the monument develop. Excavations around the monument uncover countless subtle clues. Post holes reveal vanished timber structures. Buried ditches preserve construction debris. Animal bones indicate large communal feasts. Human cremations demonstrate long-term ceremonial use. Every discovery adds another fragment to an increasingly detailed picture. At the same time, researchers begin realizing that the visible stones represent only one element of a much larger prehistoric landscape. Burial mounds spread across nearby hills. Ancient avenues connect monuments with rivers. Hidden earthworks emerge beneath cultivated fields. What once appears to be an isolated stone circle gradually reveals itself as the surviving center of an immense ceremonial complex extending for many kilometers. The 20th century accelerates this transformation. Perhaps no technological breakthrough influences prehistoric archaeology more profoundly than radiocarbon dating. Before its development, assigning accurate dates to prehistoric sites often involves educated guesswork. Researchers compare artifact styles or rely upon indirect historical relationships. Radiocarbon dating changes everything. Organic materials recovered during excavation, charcoal antlers, wooden fragments, bone can now be analysed scientifically. Suddenly archaeologists discover that the monument is far older than many earlier scholars imagine. Construction begins around 5,000 years ago. Different phases continue across many centuries. The monument is not a single event but a long process involving numerous generations. This realization fundamentally alters interpretation. Rather than asking who builds the monument, researchers increasingly ask which communities contribute during different periods and how their priorities evolve over time. Geology opens another remarkable avenue of investigation. Scientists carefully examine the mineral composition of individual stones, comparing them with rock formations across Britain. Their conclusions astonish the archaeological world. The smaller blue stones match outcrops in the Preseli Hills of Western Wales with extraordinary precision. This means prehistoric communities transport massive stones more than 200 kilometers. The discovery immediately raises new questions. How do they move such enormous weights? Why choose stones from such distant locations? What significance do those landscapes hold? The answers remain incomplete, but geological analysis firmly establishes that the builders possess logistical abilities previously underestimated. Aerial photography introduces another revolution. During certain seasons, buried archaeological features subtly affect crop growth. Plants growing above ancient ditches retain more moisture and become greener. Those above buried walls often grow more slowly. Viewed from the air, invisible prehistoric structures suddenly emerge as faint patterns stretching across the countryside. Later technologies expand this capability even further. Magnetometers detect disturbances beneath the soil without excavation. Ground-penetrating radar identifies hidden features by transmitting electromagnetic signals underground. Laser scanning maps tiny variations in surface elevation, revealing earthworks almost impossible to recognize while standing on the ground. The landscape begins surrendering secrets without requiring large-scale digging. Perhaps the most exciting development of recent decades is the integration of many scientific disciplines. Archaeology no longer works alone. Geologists identify stone sources, chemists analyze isotopes, geneticists recover ancient DNA, botanists study preserved pollen, zooarchaeologists examine animal remains, climate scientists reconstruct prehistoric environments, computer specialists create three-dimensional digital models of vanished landscapes. Every field contributes another piece to the puzzle. One particularly fascinating project reconstructs how the monument appears during different construction phases. Using detailed excavation records and digital modeling, researchers visualize timber circles standing where only empty ground exists today, missing stones restored to their original positions and surrounding ceremonial features connected into coherent landscapes. These reconstructions remind modern audiences that the monument they visit today represents only a surviving fragment of a much richer prehistoric world. Even accidental discoveries continue reshaping understanding. Construction projects, agricultural work, and new surveys occasionally uncover previously unknown burials, ceremonial pits, or settlements. Each finding demonstrates that the landscape has not finished revealing its history. Remarkably, many of archaeology's greatest breakthroughs arise not from spectacular treasures, but from humble evidence. A fragment of charcoal dates a construction phase. A microscopic grain of pollen reconstructs an ancient forest. A worn tooth reveals where someone spends childhood. A discarded animal bone identifies the season of a communal feast. Tiny clues repeatedly overturn enormous assumptions. Yet despite centuries of investigation and astonishing technological progress, the monument refuses to surrender every secret. Researchers now understand far more about its chronology, construction techniques, surrounding landscape, and participating communities than ever before. Still, some of the most important questions remain unanswered. Exactly why do distant communities cooperate so extensively? What beliefs inspire such extraordinary effort? Why are certain stones chosen over others? What emotions accompany ceremonies beneath the towering monoliths? Science illuminates many aspects of the forgotten builder's world, but it cannot fully recover human experience. That remaining uncertainty is not a failure of archaeology. It is a reminder that the past is never entirely recoverable. Even the most advanced technology cannot restore conversations that fade into silence 5,000 years ago. Yet every careful excavation brings modern humanity one step closer to recognizing the remarkable people whose history almost erased, and whose greatest monument continues patiently waiting beneath the same open sky. The more archaeologists learn about the monument, the more carefully they avoid claiming to have solved it completely. Every generation of research removes one layer of uncertainty, only to reveal another waiting beneath. That is the peculiar nature of prehistoric monuments. Their builders leave enough evidence to invite explanation, but not enough to allow absolute certainty. As a result, several competing interpretations continue to coexist, each supported by pieces of evidence, each limited by the silence of the past. The oldest and perhaps most familiar interpretation views the monument primarily as a temple. This idea has obvious appeal. Monumental architecture throughout history is frequently associated with religion. Egyptian pyramids, Mesopotamian ziggurats, Maya ceremonial centers and countless shrines across the ancient world demonstrate that sacred beliefs often inspire extraordinary construction. The careful alignment of the stones with the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset appears to reinforce this possibility. Such precision suggests that celestial events matter deeply to the builders, yet calling the monument simply a temple may oversimplify its role. Modern places of worship are often designed for regular gatherings within enclosed spaces. The archaeological evidence around the monument points towards something much broader. Ceremonial avenues, nearby settlements, burial sites, and evidence of enormous seasonal feasts all indicate that the landscape itself functions as part of the sacred experience. Rather than one building serving one purpose, the entire region operates as an interconnected ceremonial complex. Another influential interpretation emphasizes astronomy. The monument undeniably possesses remarkable solar alignments. During the summer solstice, the rising sun appears along its principal axis, while the winter solstice sunset aligns in the opposite direction. These observations require careful planning and repeated generations of watching the sky. Some early researchers extend this evidence much further. They propose that the monument functions as an advanced prehistoric observatory capable of predicting eclipses, tracking lunar cycles with extraordinary precision, or serving as an ancient scientific instrument. Modern archaeology approaches such claims cautiously. There is broad agreement that astronomical knowledge influences the monument's design. However, scholars generally reject the idea that it operates as a sophisticated observatory, comparable to modern scientific facilities. The evidence supports symbolic and ceremonial relationships with celestial events far more strongly than precise astronomical calculation. The distinction matters. Ancient communities do not need advanced mathematics to recognize the significance of the longest and shortest days of the year. Generations of careful observation naturally reveal these seasonal turning points. For agricultural societies, they possess practical importance as well as spiritual meaning. A third interpretation places ancestors at the center. The monument contains numerous cremation burials dating to its early phases. Nearby burial mounds reinforce the importance of remembering the dead within the surrounding landscape. Some archaeologists therefore argue that the stones serve primarily as a place where communities honor ancestors whose continued presence is believed to influence the living. This theory gains additional support from comparisons with other prehistoric monuments. Across many ancient societies, memory of the dead becomes inseparable from claims to land identity and tradition. Ancestors legitimize the present by connecting communities to generations stretching deep into the past. Yet again, the evidence refuses to settle comfortably into a single explanation. The monument also contains abundant signs of life rather than death. Animal bones from communal feasts, evidence of seasonal gatherings, long-distance travel, celebration as well as remembrance. These discoveries suggest that the site is not exclusively associated with funerary rituals. Instead, it appears to unite many aspects of community life. Another compelling idea focuses on social cohesion. Constructing such an enormous monument requires extraordinary cooperation among widely dispersed communities. Some researchers argue that the building process itself may be more important than the finished structure. Imagine hundreds of families gathering every year. They exchange goods, arrange marriages, share agricultural knowledge, resolve disputes, celebrate successful harvests, renew alliances. Young people meet future partners. Children grow familiar with distant relatives. The monument becomes both destination and excuse, a reason for communities separated by many days of travel to maintain lasting relationships. From this perspective, the stones symbolize cooperation more than religious doctrine. They embody the ability of independent communities to accomplish together what none could achieve alone. This interpretation fits surprisingly well with the archaeological evidence. Large feasting events, imported materials, long-distance movement of people, generational construction, all point towards sustained regional collaboration. Still, uncertainty remains. Did social unity emerge because of the monument, or did existing social unity make construction possible? The relationship may run in both directions. More recent research explores another intriguing possibility. Perhaps the monument changes purpose repeatedly across its long history. This idea reflects one of archaeology's most important insights. 500 years separate some major construction phases. No modern building retains exactly the same cultural meaning across such enormous spans of time. Consider a medieval cathedral still standing today. Its builders, later worshippers, tourists, historians, musicians, and local residents all experience the same structure differently. Why should a prehistoric monument remain culturally unchanged for centuries? Archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that it does not. Early earthworks may emphasize burial. Later stone settings may reinforce seasonal ceremonies. Subsequent generations may reinterpret inherited features according to changing beliefs. The monument evolves because society evolves. This flexible interpretation explains many apparent contradictions. The site can simultaneously be associated with ancestors' celestial events, communal gatherings, and ceremonial processions, because different generations emphasize different aspects. One lesser-known but fascinating debate concerns sound. Acoustic researchers observe that certain arrangements of standing stones create unusual echoes and resonances. Experimental studies suggest that ceremonies involving music chanting or rhythmic percussion would produce distinctive auditory experiences within parts of the monument. Most archaeologists remain cautious. The acoustic properties are real. Whether prehistoric builders intentionally designed them remains far more difficult to establish. The evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive. It serves as another reminder that ancient architecture engages many human senses beyond simple visual appearance. Popular culture often introduces far more dramatic theories. Claims involving extraterrestrials, vanished super-civilizations, or mysterious lost technologies continue circulating widely. These explanations attract attention because they offer simple answers to complex questions. However, they lack credible archaeological support. Every major aspect of the monument, its construction sequence tool marks quarry sources, associated settlements, burials, and surrounding landscape fits comfortably within what is known about late Neolithic and early Bronze Age societies. No extraordinary technology is required, only extraordinary human cooperation. Perhaps that is ultimately the most challenging explanation to accept. Modern observers sometimes underestimate prehistoric people because they lack writing iron tools or large centralized states. Yet archaeology repeatedly demonstrates that intelligence, creativity, engineering skill, and organizational ability do not suddenly appear with recorded history. They have always belonged to humanity. The monument therefore resists any single label: temple, calendar, burial ground, pilgrimage center, political gathering place, ceremonial landscape. Each captures part of the truth while missing something equally important. The forgotten builders likely never divide these functions as neatly as modern scholars attempt to do. For them, spirituality, astronomy, ancestry, agriculture, community, and landscape may exist as parts of one interconnected worldview rather than separate categories. The monument reflects that complexity. Its silence does not conceal one perfect answer. Instead, it preserves a richer reality in which many meanings overlap, just as they often do within human societies across every age. As archaeologists gradually piece together the story of this forgotten monument, another realization quietly emerges. The builders are not unique. Across distant continents and vastly different landscapes, other prehistoric communities also undertake astonishing projects long before written history begins. None of these societies knows the others exist. Oceans, deserts, mountain ranges, and thousands of kilometers separate them, yet they arrive at remarkably similar ideas. They reshape landscapes, move immense stones, align monuments with the heavens, and create ceremonial spaces that outlive their own names by millennia. This pattern has fascinated researchers for generations. At first glance, similarities between distant monuments seem almost too striking to be coincidence. Massive standing stones appear in Western Europe. Giant earthworks emerge across parts of North America. Monumental ceremonial centers develop in the Andes. Enormous stone architecture rises independently in parts of Asia and Africa. To casual observers, such parallels invite speculation about forgotten global civilizations or lost networks spanning the prehistoric world. Modern archaeology offers a different explanation. Human beings, despite living in different environments, often face comparable challenges and develop comparable solutions. Communities that settle permanently, cultivate crops, observe seasonal cycles, and strengthen social bonds through collective ritual, frequently begin transforming the landscapes around them. Monumental construction appears not because civilizations share one mysterious origin, but because human societies repeatedly discover that building together creates lasting identity. One of the closest comparisons comes from the Great Passage tombs of prehistoric Ireland. Centuries before many of the world's famous historical kingdoms emerge, communities construct enormous burial monuments using carefully fitted stone. The most celebrated of these new granges is aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. On only a few mornings each year, sunlight enters a narrow opening above the entrance and travels deep into the inner chamber, illuminating a space otherwise left in darkness. The precision is breathtaking, yet the builders possess no written mathematics, no metal surveying equipment, and no permanent bureaucracy resembling later states. Like the creators of the great stone monument farther east, they rely upon careful observation, inherited knowledge, and remarkable communal effort. The similarities are striking, but so are the differences. Newgrange is fundamentally enclosed, guiding participants into darkness before revealing light. The Great Stone Circle remains largely open to the sky, encouraging movement through an expansive ceremonial landscape. Both interact with the sun, yet they express different cultural ideas through architecture. Farther south, in what is now France, the standing stones of Karnak stretch across the countryside in astonishing numbers. Thousands of upright stones form long parallel alignments extending for kilometers. Walking among them today creates an almost overwhelming sense of scale. Unlike a single circular monument, Karnak transforms the landscape into a seemingly endless sequence of carefully positioned markers. Scholars still debate their precise purpose. Some emphasize ceremonial processions. Others suggest territorial symbolism. Still others see changing ritual traditions unfolding across centuries. Once again, certainty remains elusive. What is unmistakable is that prehistoric communities repeatedly invest extraordinary labor into shaping places whose importance extends far beyond practical necessity. Across the Mediterranean, monumental temples appear on the islands of Malta. These structures, among the oldest freestanding stone buildings in the world, demonstrate sophisticated planning and impressive masonry long before classical civilizations dominate the region. Their curved walls, carefully constructed chambers, and repeated architectural patterns reveal societies capable of organizing large-scale labor despite leaving few written traces. Each discovery challenges older assumptions about prehistoric capability. For much of the 19th century, scholars often imagine early farming communities as technologically limited and socially simple. Every newly investigated monument steadily dismantles that stereotype. The forgotten builders are increasingly joined by countless other forgotten builders. Across the Atlantic, entirely different societies create monumental earthworks on astonishing scales. Centuries before European arrival, indigenous communities in North America shape enormous geometric enclosures. Ceremonial mounds and animal-shaped earthworks visible only from elevated perspectives. These constructions require planning cooperation and sustained labour comparable in ambition, though very different in form from the great stone monuments of Europe. No contact exists between these distant worlds. No shared architectural tradition crosses the ocean. Instead, similar social needs generate different but equally remarkable achievements. South America provides further examples. Long before the Inca Empire, ancient Andean societies construct ceremonial centres. Pyramids, terraces, and carefully planned settlements adapted to dramatically different environments. High mountains replace open chalk plains. Volcanic stone replaces sandstone. Yet the underlying human impulse remains. Familiar communities invest collective labour into places carrying deep ceremonial and social significance. These comparisons reveal something profound. Monumentality is not the invention of one civilization. It is a recurring expression of humanity itself. Whenever populations become sufficiently organized, connected through shared beliefs, and capable of long-term planning, they often begin creating structures designed to outlast individual lifetimes. This observation also helps explain why so many ancient monuments become surrounded by myths. Later societies frequently underestimate the capabilities of their predecessors. When written history disappears, imagination rushes in. Giants build the stones, gods shape the earthworks, lost empires raise impossible temples. The real builders become invisible precisely because they are ordinary human beings. Yet archaeology repeatedly restores them to view, not through dramatic discoveries of hidden treasure, but through thousands of patient observations. A fragment of pottery, a quarry scar, a pollen grain, a burial, a worn tool. Piece by piece, forgotten communities emerge from anonymity. Comparative archaeology also teaches an important lesson about cultural independence. Superficial similarities do not necessarily indicate direct contact. Aligning monuments with the sun, for example, appears in many unrelated societies because every human community experiences sunrise, sunset, changing seasons, and the annual cycle of light. Building with stone becomes common where suitable stone is available. Constructing earthworks flourishes where earth is abundant. Local environments shape local solutions. Recognizing this diversity prevents oversimplification. The forgotten builders belong to their own unique historical tradition. Their monument reflects the geology, climate beliefs, and social relationships of prehistoric Britain, rather than some universal blueprint. At the same time, their achievement connects them with a much larger human story. Across continents and millennia, countless unnamed communities demonstrate extraordinary creativity without leaving written histories. Many disappear so completely that only their architecture preserves their existence. This realization transforms how the monument is viewed. It is no longer simply an isolated mystery standing alone on an English plain. It becomes part of a worldwide record of prehistoric ingenuity, a reminder that history's earliest chapters are filled not with primitive beginnings, but with sophisticated societies whose greatest accomplishments survive while their names vanish. The forgotten builders therefore gain unexpected companions. From Ireland to Malta, from France to the Americas, from the Andes to distant ceremonial landscapes elsewhere in the world, anonymous generations quietly prove the same enduring truth. Human beings do not need kings' empires or written chronicles to create works that reshape the world. Sometimes all they require is shared purpose, remarkable patience, and the willingness to build something greater than themselves, something that will continue speaking long after every voice involved in its creation has fallen silent. History has an unmistakable habit of remembering the powerful while forgetting the countless people whose labour makes greatness possible. Kings leave inscriptions, emperors commission statues, victorious generals appear in chronicles written by their own scribes. Entire museums are filled with the possessions of rulers whose names survive precisely because someone had both the ability and the desire to record them. Meanwhile, millions of ordinary people pass through history almost unnoticed, even though they build the roads, cultivate the fields, quarry the stone, and create the societies that allow famous leaders to exist at all. The monument stands as one of the clearest examples of this imbalance. No surviving inscription celebrates its architects. No royal tomb identifies its patron. No dynasty claims responsibility for its construction. The achievement belongs almost entirely to anonymous communities whose collective effort outlasts every individual memory. That anonymity has shaped public perception for centuries. When people imagine remarkable prehistoric monuments, many instinctively search for extraordinary individuals behind them. There must have been a visionary king, a brilliant engineer, a legendary priest, someone whose personal ambition explains the entire enterprise. Archaeology repeatedly suggests something more complicated. Large-scale prehistoric monuments often emerge from societies where leadership certainly exists, but is expressed differently from the centralized monarchies of later history. Authority may be shared among respected elders, ritual specialists, influential families, or temporary leaders chosen for particular tasks. Decision-making may depend as much upon consensus and tradition as upon command. Exactly how these systems function remains uncertain. The evidence rarely preserves political structures directly. Wooden meeting places decay. Conversations disappear forever. Oral agreements leave no archaeological trace. What survives are the results of cooperation. This makes reconstructing prehistoric social organization unusually difficult. Nevertheless, the monument itself offers indirect evidence. Construction extends across many centuries. The continuity implies stable cultural traditions capable of surviving changes in leadership. Individual personalities come and go, yet the project continues. Such persistence suggests that commitment to the monument belongs to the community rather than to any single ruler. It is an astonishing concept. Imagine beginning work on a structure knowing with certainty that neither you nor your children will live to see it completed. Modern infrastructure projects sometimes last decades. The monument requires generations. Every participant contributes to something fundamentally incomplete. This demands extraordinary confidence in the future. The builders trust that descendants not yet born will honor commitments made long before their own lives begin. That trust becomes one of the monument's greatest achievements. Modern societies often measure success through immediate results. Prehistoric communities operating on generational timescales demonstrate another form of ambition. They invest effort not for personal recognition but for cultural continuity. Few individuals expect their own names to survive. Instead, they ensure that the monument itself endures. Ironically, this very selflessness contributes to their disappearance from history. Without written records emphasizing individual achievement, later generations inherit the stones, but not the identities behind them. History therefore develops an unintended bias. Written civilizations appear more visible than equally sophisticated non-literate societies. This does not necessarily mean they are more advanced. It simply means they preserve different kinds of evidence. An empire producing thousands of clay tablets naturally leaves richer documentary archives than farming communities relying entirely upon oral tradition. Yet written records have limitations too. They often celebrate elites while ignoring ordinary lives. Ancient kings proudly describe military victories but rarely mention the farmers feeding their armies. Imperial inscriptions praise monumental architecture without identifying the thousands of workers who actually construct it. Even within literate civilizations, anonymous labor remains surprisingly invisible. The forgotten builders are therefore not unique. They merely represent the most dramatic example of a universal historical pattern. Consider the countless unnamed stonemasons who raise medieval cathedrals, the anonymous craftsmen carving temple walls across Asia, the laborers constructing Roman roads, the artisans decorating palaces whose rulers receive all the credit. Again and again, monuments preserve achievement while obscuring the people responsible. Archaeology attempts to correct this imbalance. Rather than focusing exclusively upon rulers, it studies entire communities. Broken cooking pots become as significant as ceremonial objects. Discarded tools reveal economic life. Animal bones illuminate diet. Post holes reconstruct houses. Tiny fragments ignored by earlier generations become central sources of historical knowledge. This shift transforms historical perspective. Instead of asking only what great leaders accomplish, researchers increasingly ask how ordinary people experience changing societies. The monument becomes invaluable precisely because it lacks royal propaganda. It cannot exaggerate victories. It cannot glorify dynasties. Its stones simply exist. Interpreting them requires listening carefully to evidence rather than inherited political narratives. One remarkable consequence is that prehistoric communities often appear surprisingly egalitarian compared with many later states. This does not mean everyone enjoys identical status or influence. Differences undoubtedly exist. Some burials contain richer grave goods. Certain individuals likely possess greater authority. Yet the absence of palaces, royal tombs, or extravagant elite residences around the monument suggests a society investing extraordinary resources into communal, rather than purely personal display. That observation continues generating debate. Some scholars argue that hidden hierarchies still organize construction. Others emphasize collective participation. The evidence supports elements of both positions. Human societies are rarely completely equal or completely unequal. They exist somewhere between these extremes. What remains striking is the direction of investment. Rather than concentrating wealth inside private monuments dedicated to rulers, these communities repeatedly channel labor into shared ceremonial landscapes accessible across generations. The monument therefore becomes a physical expression of collective identity. Its builders may disagree, compete, and negotiate like every human society, yet they repeatedly cooperate on projects benefiting the community as a whole. This realization also changes the emotional meaning of the monument. Standing among the stones today is not simply an encounter with ancient engineering. It is an encounter with forgotten generosity. Thousands of people contribute labor to a future they will never personally enjoy. They shape a place intended for descendants they will never meet. Few historical achievements demonstrate such long-term thinking. Perhaps that is why the monument still resonates so deeply. Visitors instinctively sense that it represents something larger than technical skill. It embodies faith not necessarily in a specific religion but in continuity itself. Faith that future generations matter. Faith that memory deserves physical form. Faith that communities can accomplish together what individuals cannot achieve alone. History forgets the builders' names. Archaeology gradually recovers fragments of their lives. The monument quietly preserves the values they leave behind. In the end, that may be the greatest legacy of all. The forgotten builders remind the modern world that civilization is rarely created by famous individuals acting alone. It is almost always built by countless anonymous hands working patiently across generations, trusting that their efforts will outlast them. The stones continue standing because those hands once believed that the future was worth building, even if history would never remember who they were. The monument still stands where the forgotten builders leave it exposed to every season that follows. Winter frost settles into the cracks between the stones. Spring grass returns across the surrounding plain. Summer sunlight traces the same ancient alignments that prehistoric observers once watched with careful attention. Autumn winds carry seeds across earthworks dug 5,000 years earlier. Civilizations change, languages disappear, religions rise and fall, empires expand and collapse. Yet the monument quietly continues measuring time in a way no written chronicle ever could. For much of its existence it simply survives. There are periods when local communities quarry ancient stones from abandoned monuments elsewhere in Britain to construct churches, bridges, houses, and boundary walls. Such reuse is common throughout history. Old monuments often become convenient sources of valuable building material. Remarkably, the Great Stone Circle escapes complete destruction. Some stones fall through natural causes, others lean dangerously over the centuries, but enough remains intact to preserve the monument's unmistakable identity. By the 18th and 19th centuries, increasing numbers of travellers begin visiting the site. Artists sketch it beneath dramatic skies. Poets describe its mysterious atmosphere. Early historians debate its purpose with growing enthusiasm. The monument gradually becomes more than an archaeological curiosity. It transforms into a symbol of deep antiquity itself, a visible reminder that the human story extends far beyond the limits of written history. Yet public fascination creates unexpected challenges. Growing visitor numbers accelerate erosion. Curious tourists climb the stones, carve initials into their surfaces, and occasionally remove small fragments as souvenirs. Livestock grazing around the site wear down ancient earthworks. Modern roads bring increasing accessibility, but also new pressures upon an already fragile landscape. Recognition of these dangers leads to one of the earliest large-scale monument conservation efforts in Britain. During the early 20th century, engineers carefully stabilized several dangerously leaning stones. Some have shifted gradually over thousands of years, as surrounding soil settles and weather weakens their foundations. Without intervention, collapse becomes increasingly likely. The restoration work is deliberately cautious. Researchers attempt to preserve the monument rather than rebuild it according to modern imagination. Every adjustment is documented carefully, acknowledging that future archaeologists may interpret evidence differently. Conservation becomes an ongoing dialogue between protecting the past and respecting its authenticity. Meanwhile, scientific understanding continues advancing. Each decade introduces new techniques unimaginable to earlier generations. Laser scanning records the monument with astonishing precision. Three-dimensional digital models preserve every surface irregularity. Geochemical analysis identifies quarry sources with increasing confidence. Ancient DNA reveals prehistoric population movements. Satellite imagery helps reconstruct the wider ceremonial landscape. None of these technologies changes the stones themselves. Instead, they change humanity's ability to listen. The monument becomes less mysterious not because its secrets disappear, but because new methods allow forgotten evidence to speak. Its significance also expands beyond archaeology. Today, the site is recognized internationally as one of humanity's most important prehistoric cultural landscapes. Visitors arrive from every continent bringing different languages, beliefs, and expectations. Some come seeking historical understanding, others seek spiritual connection. Many simply wish to stand before something that has survived almost beyond comprehension. During the summer and winter solstices, thousands gather to witness the ancient solar alignments. Modern celebrations differ profoundly from prehistoric ceremonies. No one can recreate beliefs that vanished thousands of years earlier. Yet the act of assembling beneath the stones at moments of seasonal transition creates an unexpected continuity. Human beings remain fascinated by the same sky, the same sunrise, the same turning of the year. The monument continues fulfilling one of its oldest functions. It gathers people together. Climate change introduces new questions for the future. Changing rainfall patterns influence soil stability. More frequent extreme weather events increase erosion risks. Growing tourism requires careful management to balance public access with long-term preservation. Conservators face the same fundamental challenge confronting every generation. How can something so ancient remain protected without losing the qualities that make it meaningful? The answer is never simple. Every protective fence alters the visitor experience. Every pathway changes movement across the landscape. Every conservation decision balances competing responsibilities towards science, public education, cultural heritage, and future generations. In this respect, the modern world becomes another steward rather than an owner. The monument has already survived thousands of years before any living person is born. The responsibility is merely to ensure that it survives thousands more. Perhaps the most remarkable transformation concerns the forgotten builders themselves. For centuries they are dismissed as primitive, mysterious, or even mythical. Today archaeology restores much of their humanity. They become skilled engineers without metal, farmers capable of remarkable organization, communities connected across vast regions, observers of the heavens, builders thinking not in years but in generations. They remain anonymous, yet they are no longer invisible. That distinction matters. A name is powerful. Understanding is more powerful still. The monument teaches that civilization cannot be measured solely through writing empire or technological complexity. Human greatness also appears in cooperation, in patience, in shared purpose, in the willingness to build something whose full meaning extends beyond one lifetime. 5,000 years after the first earth is moved and the first stone begins its journey, the monument continues performing its quiet work. It reminds each generation that memory is fragile. Identity changes, languages disappear, political borders shift endlessly. Yet human curiosity persists. Every visitor arriving beneath these ancient stones asks in one form or another the same question posed for centuries. Who builds something like this? The answer has become clearer through decades of careful research. Not giants, not magicians, not vanished super-civilizations. Ordinary people, extraordinary communities. History forgets their names but cannot erase their achievement. As evening settles across the plain, shadows lengthen exactly as they do for the builders thousands of years earlier. The wind carries no voices from the distant past. The monument offers no final explanation. It simply stands, weathered but unbroken, inviting every generation to recognize that some of humanity's greatest accomplishments belong not to famous rulers whose names fill history books, but to quiet communities whose lives disappear almost completely, leaving behind only stone landscape, and the enduring proof that forgotten people are capable of creating unforgettable worlds. The sun continues its slow journey across the horizon just as it has for thousands of years. Long after the final builders set down their tools, the seasons keep returning with quiet certainty. Grass grows over ancient pathways. Rain settles into old ditches before sinking into the chalk below. Birds cross the sky without knowing they are flying above one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. The people who raise these stones never expect to become famous. They do not carve their names into monuments or write chronicles celebrating their achievements. Instead, they leave something far more unusual. They leave a place that continues inviting wonder long after every individual memory has faded. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson carried by the monument. Civilizations are often imagined through kings, battles, and empires. Yet beneath every chapter of history lies another story, the story of ordinary communities whose patience, cooperation, and shared purpose make remarkable achievements possible. Most are never remembered individually. Their houses return to the earth, their voices disappear into silence, even their languages fade beyond recovery. And yet their work remains. Standing among the stones today is not simply an encounter with the distant past. It is a quiet reminder that time measures humanity differently than people measure themselves. Reputation may vanish within generations, empires may crumble, borders may be redrawn countless times, but an idea carefully shaped into the landscape can outlast almost everything else. The forgotten builders are no longer entirely forgotten. Science has recovered fragments of their world from grains of pollen, worn teeth, discarded tools, buried hearths, and weathered stone. Much remains uncertain, and perhaps some mysteries will never be solved. That uncertainty is part of the monument's enduring power. It encourages humility as much as curiosity, reminding us that the past is always larger than the stories that survive. As daylight fades and long shadows stretch once more between the ancient stones, the monument becomes what it has always been, a meeting place between memory and mystery. It asks for no final answer. It simply endures, carrying forward the quiet legacy of people whose greatest achievement was never preserving their own names, but creating something strong enough to ensure that thousands of years later, humanity would still stop, look across the silent landscape, and remember that even those history forgets can leave marks that time itself cannot erase.